Today we're going to have just a brief overview of the direct method. We're going to talk a little bit about the background of this method, its principles, an example of using the direct method in class, and finally we'll talk about some of the pros and cons of this method. So let's get started here. Um, First, let's talk about this here. Why was the direct method developed? Well, early forms of language teaching focused largely on literacy, and they focused very little on speaking and listening. Yes, but towards the 19th century, the focus of both the learners and the teachers was starting to shift towards oral communication and to developing listening skills as well. And so the direct method was developed as a response to this new change of focus. And it was designed as a way to mimic the way that humans naturally learn a language. That is, with no interference from the learner's native language. So, all instruction with this method was to be done in the target language. No translation would be involved. So any meaning connected to a word would be transmitted directly to the student under this method. This, of course, contrasted heavily with the then prevalent grammar translation method, which involved very little, if any, oral communication as part of its instruction. Um, so, with this method, there are some basic principles here. And you can see that there really isn't that much to this because we can kind of consider direct method as almost an umbrella term. And there aren't a whole lot of prescribed rules to this method. But these are the basic ones taken from Richards and Rogers' book. So for one thing, instruction in the direct method is given only in the target language, as I was saying before. So with this method, there is nothing from the native language of the student. Everything is done in the target language. So if you were to be using this method in your classes, you would only be using English, no Spanish, or anything else. Next, with this method, only common everyday vocabulary and structures are taught for the most part. There isn't anything too abstract or something or anything that would be too far away from just the common everyday language that we use all the time. Next, instruction involves a question and answer format between teachers and students in small groups with new vocabulary and structures being introduced in a specific order. Yeah, so under most direct curriculums, you will have a specific order of doing things depending on the student, and the format is always going to be question and answer. Uh, with this, it's also important to keep in mind that complete sentences must be used all the time if possible. So we have complete questions, complete sentences, that is, to form the questions, and complete sentences to give the answers. Yes, so both the teacher and student are ideally using complete sentences all the time. Next, grammar is only taught inductively. This means that the teacher does not explain grammar rules, but rather the students learn the grammar through observation and practice. Yes. So you're never going to give grammar explanations to your students if you're using this method. Rather, they're just supposed to learn it through your examples and through their own practicing. Next, the teacher will always introduce the new teaching points orally. So you're never going to see the teacher writing the new topics on the board or something like that. No, it's all oral. Next, demonstration, that is, using things like pictures, objects, and gestures. These are used to teach the concrete vocabulary to the students. For abstract vocabulary, or things that you couldn't demonstrate with a picture, these are taught with idea association. Next, the teaching develops both speech and listening comprehension, while this method doesn't actually focus too much on reading and writing. The speech and listening are developed here. And finally, the teaching involves both grammar and pronunciation correction. And it heavily emphasizes these. So if you're using this method, it's important to keep in mind that you have to be strict about the grammar and the pronunciation of your students. Now we're going to take a look at an example of this method in action. Well, maybe not in action, but we're at least going to look at an example of how you might teach a noun using this method. So here we have a picture of an apple. If you want to teach a student this word using the direct method, a way that you could do this is following this procedure. So the teacher will hold up a picture of the apple and model it for the student using a complete sentence, saying, "This is an apple," and then repeat, "This is an apple." Then the teacher will ask the student, "What's this? What's this?" Or, "What is this? What is this?" And the student will respond, "This is an apple," ideally, if they get it right. Yeah. Notice here that the student is using a complete sentence to give his or her response. If the student says the word wrong, for example, as apple, the teacher can say apple or apple. Giving the student a chance to self-correct is the best option here, which is why we're giving them a choice, apple or apple. Then the teacher can motion for the student to try again by leading them with "this is an," and if the student tries to just complete the sentence, saying just apple, for example, the teacher can start again, prompting the student to say the whole sentence. This is an apple, right? And ideally, the student will say the entire thing. This is an apple. Yes. So that's the idea here. It's a pretty simple process, and we can see that it does. I mean, using this method, it's pretty simple, as I was saying, and it does tend to work well for the lower level students, A1 to A2 levels. Following this method, it really does. It works well. There are some pros and cons, though, to this method. One of the pros is that students learn common everyday language with this method, which is what a lot of people are looking for. Most people, I would even argue. Next is that it's viewed by many as a natural way to learn the language, as you're not using the L1, and by not using the L1 in class, this theoretically implies that there will be less L1, and I should say L1 is the native language, but that there should be less native language inhibition experienced in the learner when they're learning by this method. Another positive to this is that oral communication and listening develop a great deal using this method, given the constant spoken use of the language during instruction. But there are some cons, though, and I've only listed a few here. But one would be that native or native-like language skills are required from the teacher in order for this method to be truly successful. And this is because when you're teaching with this method, you really, as we said before, you really have to emphasize pronunciation and grammar. And to be able to do that, you have to have a really good level yourself as a teacher. And not only that, but because you're not allowed to use the native language of the students, you have to be able to do everything in the target language, in English in this case. And if you don't have the level to do that as a teacher, then this can be a difficult method to pull off, for sure, when you're teaching. And another con to this is that it can be difficult to prevent understanding when it can be difficult to prevent misunderstanding when translation isn't permitted. I mean, think about it. If you can't explain anything in the native language, and you've got this abstract concept that you're supposed to be able to teach by just through idea association, sometimes it's just not enough for the students, and they won't understand. So these are some pros and cons to the method. But now I'm interested to hear, after hearing this overview of the method, what could be some more pros and cons that you could think of with this method? Thanks, everyone.